Well, we have a pretty important episode for you today. If you have seen the promotion for it, you know that we're looking at creating a coaching culture inside of an organization. In this case, specifically today, it is within the huge organization Youth with a Mission, or YWAM, as we so often refer to them. So creating a coaching culture inside of an organization. We hope that one of the fruits that comes out of this is that as you're listening, even if you're not at all familiar with YWAM, that you will be listening through the ears of whatever organizations you may be involved in. You, the listener, you are involved with missions organizations or ministries at your churches or movements within your denomination or in settings within your workplace and in your community and in your families. And so the idea of fostering a coaching culture within those organizational settings is at one time a kind of a vague and fuzzy concept. At another place, it's a very specific set of intentional actions and choices that you make. And so we hope you're kind of going to get a chance to hear that as we unpack this today. Many of our listeners will not be very familiar with Youth with a Mission. And so if you could tell us just the broadest overview of the ministry itself. It's very complex, very decentralized, and has fingers in lots of different places all around the globe, but always for advancing the gospel of Christ in any setting. So if you could paint us a picture of that, and then a little bit about where you saw coaching plugging in here, and we'll springboard off of that.
Okay, sure. Well, Youth with a Mission is an interdenominational, international mission organization, and we have three main areas that we minister into. We have mercy ministries, training, and evangelism. Those are the three branches, and they, of course, overlap and come together in most ministries, but those are the three main areas that people step out into. I myself have been involved with the Discipleship Training School and the University of the Nations for most of my time with YWAM. And I think one of the things that has been so impactful for me, I've had the privilege of having Vicki come to different places where I was. It has been so meaningful to us to be able to come together and have someone like Vicki come in and ask us questions, take us through a process that opens up a whole new perspective of our own ministry and helps to facilitate not only our own ministry, but because myself and a lot of the people that I work with are directly involved with discipleship, we then can pass on some of these question asking, listening, some of the coaching modeling that Vicki's doing. It fits and dovetails right into discipleship.
It's a beautiful vision, and I can just hear the ripple effects going out, even as you're talking into all the different countries and different lives and the different people. And so, Vicki, as you think about bringing coaching to that and to people and maybe countries and cultures that have never really heard of coaching or aren't aware of coaching, surely it must have been new to some people. What kind of responses have you had?
I think at first there was some reticence. There was some hesitance about what this really is, not knowing yet the distinction between coaching and counseling, for example, or coaching and discipling, or even coaching and the one-on-ones that these leaders already do. But as you know, in these different settings, we were able to model what the coaching is really about. I think as they've become more and more acclimated, the ones I've had contact with have really overcome any reticence and hesitation, and now they're starting to see, wow, we could take pieces of that, like Lisa's saying, and use it in our own ministries to make a difference. Mm. So that's been really fun. And I'll have to say, as a coach, it's fabulous to work with someone like Lisa, ask a powerful question, and then see that as she processes it, there is an immediate impact. If she's going to the Eastern European meetings and she's processing here and coaching priorities for that, next week she's implementing around the world. That's fun.
Wow. And so it sounds like, if I'm envisioning what you're saying correctly, you work with people in groups and you also work with them individually. And I think as each of us tries to bring coaching to our ministries, to our churches, to our neighborhoods, and those kinds of things, it's important to think of the different ways and the different modalities we could use. So talk a little bit about how you've actually brought it to people, the specific applications.
Yes, it could be in a group setting, a large group or small group setting. It could be in working in dyads where two leaders are on the phone with me, for example, or it could be one-on-one, like as Lisa and I've met together. So in a group setting, it's really an application of the retreat coaching I do. It's not an actual retreat, but some of the ways that I can take a basic coaching concept and bring it to life. Mm-hmm. So many of you who are listening may be familiar with the priorities wheel or the wheel of life. It's simply a way of picturing a wheel broken up into various segments that represent the different aspects of your life. And you can name them. It may be health, it may be personal relationships, it may be professional, personal development, any finances, all those areas. And we would take duct tape and make a giant life-size version of that wheel on the floor. And I would invite a leader to come step into it. I remember inviting Michelle in, who was having fun with it. She would step in one area and say, oh, everything's great here. She stepped into professional development, personal development, said, I think this is overrated. and then stepped into health and immediately had a dramatic emotional response and knew that there were some things God was stirring within her to act on and apply. And that was the kind of setting that drew out something that was under the surface waiting to be expressed.
Yeah, and that's beneficial not just for the person doing it, but for everybody watching to literally see that acted out and lived out right in front of you. That just kind of gives me goosebumps. And before you go to individual coaching, can I just follow up? I remember hearing you one time talk also about a step into the future exercise that had that same sort of, duct tape's good for everything. That same sort of duct tape application. Yeah. Could you talk about duct tape and stepping into the future for a minute?
So that is one of our coaching skills that we talk about in the essentials of life coach training. You're actually picturing a timeline and you're helping the client gain another time perspective. Mm-hmm. So it lets them see something from another angle. In this case, from the future perspective. So they would actually picture themselves stepping into maybe a particular decision, stepping into the future, walking down the road, whatever time frame they choose, maybe a few years, and then stopping to speak from that time perspective. What's going on? What are they experiencing? What are the possibilities? And maybe even then looking back to see what were the key steps that helped them to get there. Mm-hmm. That has been powerful.
Man, I can well imagine that's very different than just verbally encouraging somebody, hey, step into the future and imagine yourself in a future place and kind of. But when you're actually stepping it out and looking back, not over your metaphorical, but your literal shoulder now, back at that duct tape line from where you came from, that puts you in a different space, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, probably.
Yeah, actually, Chris, I can say Vicki has done that with me a few times with the duct tape, but also even verbally on the phone when I finished my master's degree last year. I really appreciate that exercise for myself. And I've heard myself ask friends who even just in conversations are struggling with the next step or something, and I'll say, imagine yourself, and in my head I'm thinking, what would Vicki ask right now?
Right.
Vicki Corrington. So it has been a very helpful process.
I love it, Lisa, because that's illustrating this vague concept of creating a coaching culture. Even if we're not a trained coach, we've experienced not only the exercise, the impact of the exercise. And of course, you're going to reach into your bag of tools and you're going to pull those things out. And so you get this multiplying kind of effect.
Right. Yes. And I do have another example of that that was very impactful for me, if I may share that. The three of us were in a coaching process, and we were in a part of the masters where we were looking at our own stories, and I was stuck. I was like, oh my gosh, in Youth with a Mission, we do different things like this a lot. So I was like, ho hum, here we go again. And I was a bit stuck in trying to write out my timeline of my life because I felt like I had done it so many times. And as a child, my father had passed away. And so I was like, yeah, I've told that story. I've used that in teaching. It's been a testimony. And so Vicki asked a few questions in the process of me doing this timeline, and she asked about various events. What was the most significant event in my childhood? And of course, I responded that it was when my father passed away when I was 11. And she immediately said, what color was that event? And when she said that question, both myself and my friend Cindy that was on the other end, we both went, you could almost feel the oxygen leave the rooms we were in because it was such a powerful question. And I said to Vicki, where did you get that? And she said, it just came to me. She said, I really believe the Holy Spirit just gave me that question. So, and we could feel that it was such a tender moment. Well, what happened from that was me considering that question just opened up an aspect of my story that I had not allowed myself to open up into. And what then unfolded was I have been doing retreats centered around story. And I feel like because of my own story being opened up in the coaching process, I've been able to help others open up their stories. And I use that even as an example. And it has been, I even have the timeline out that I color coded after Vicki asked that question. I started doing a color coding of my timeline of what were red bomb events, like my dad passing away, what were, rainbow events. And I love colors. You can tell by my top that I'm wearing. So I had just a very colorful timeline of my life. And when I look back at that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this all came from one very strategically, but spontaneously asked question in a coaching moment. And it has just, I can't even tell you the ripple effects it's had in my life and in those that I've actually taught afterwards.
Boy, Lisa, thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that. As you said, it's a very personal story. And I would imagine that some of our listeners are saying, wait, I'm not tracking with this. What does that question mean? What color was that event? And the beauty of that is exactly the beauty of it is that oftentimes in coaching, the question is just kind of a question that seems like it's begging to be asked. In this case, Vicki sensed that the Holy Spirit was prompting it. We don't even know what it means, but it's not asked in context of a model that you were working on that was a color-coded model or something. It was a question that was in that particular moment begging to be asked. We've prayed for the Holy Spirit to inhabit, to facilitate the coaching process. He, surprise, surprise, does. He shows up and does that with a open-ended, curious, I don't even know for sure what this question means. It might be a crazy one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And the client then utilizes that question by assigning to it whatever it means to them. It's not a formulaic kind of a process that's being walked through all the time in coaching. It's oftentimes a very, very fluid, extremely creative kind of a dance that's being experienced. And that just really illustrated it there beautifully and powerfully. Thank you.
And so either of you can answer this, but if you kind of looked at the big view, the 30,000-foot view, what has coaching brought to this particular master's program that wouldn't be there if coaching weren't a part of it?
I feel like it pushed me forward in all that I was doing. Not really pushed, that because that sounds like it, but it drew me maybe forward or encouraged me forward or something in my processes a lot faster than I would have had I not had it. And I also used an analogy of a ball of yarn. And for me, oftentimes in these situations, where we've got the classes, we've got the teachings, we've got our ministry going on, and then we're given this big, okay, you have to do a thesis or a capstone project. And it all can feel like a huge tight ball of yarn that you have no idea how to unravel all this stuff and make sense of it. And for me, the coaching did that. It pulled that ball of yarn apart and gave it air and space. And I began to untangle the things that seemed to be tangling. And I can almost see that in this next group, their ball of yarn is still tight. And I think we need to take them through some processes that's going to loosen it. And I think the coaching is one of the things that's going to do that.
Do you know, I love that. I think what I'm hearing you say is that coaching being purposely integrated into this larger program of a master's actually was the piece that helped you stay in touch with you throughout. As you talk about teasing the yarn apart and having space and air in there, it's like you could remember, why am I doing this? What's it all for? Why am I sticking it out and struggling through this? And so, yeah, you corrected yourself in saying, first, it pushed me. No, it didn't push me. It pulled me. It drew me. There was the word that was on my tongue was woo. There was kind of a wooing effect in that it pulled you all the way through to completion. So now, not only do you have those letters after your name, but far more importantly, you did complete, and it's like an explosion on the back end of having finished this. Now you have all that new learning, and you have a completely different worldview and presence of self as someone who has undergone that much coaching, that much stretching and greater self-awareness, and you've messed with your Myers-Briggs profile, and you know Lisa a whole lot better than you did. You are a different person than you were when you went through this program.
Yes.
I will say, too, that Lisa is one who, she is a completer. She is one to follow through. And that's true for many of them. And yet still, it is so valuable to not just have to press through on your own, alone, out there isolated, because people are all over the world, not necessarily in a close-knit community, geographically speaking. So that was really great to see how you are a representation, Lisa, of the healthy, productive leader already who's using the coaching that's made available to you to take it to another whole level. It's not about dragging you along. It's about setting you free to go even further.
Yeah, no, and I would definitely say coaching has been a huge blessing on from many angles for me. And yeah, it's just been a huge blessing.
As our time starts to come to a close, Vicki, what encouragement do you have for our listeners who would also like to have this kind of measurable, eternal, observable impact in God's kingdom?
Wow. Well, because of how I saw this unfold, I would say really, pay attention to relationships now. To really building those strong relationships that are trusting relationships that could develop into something later where there can be a partnering, where you're not just starting coaching as a new thing, but this is a building in and building on. I had a love for missions when I was a young girl. And then at different retreats, the part that would give me the goosebumps, Kim, would be when people would stand up, the praise and worship songs we'd been singing in English. Those who sang it in Romanian would stand up and sing, and those who sang in French would stand up and sing. And that I just love that. So just noticing, paying attention to relationships, paying attention to the opportunities, the real passions there, and I think really looking for where there is the readiness. We talk about that in our training, that there needs to be that readiness. There needs to be a desire to move forward in a healthy way and to open up possibilities. And not every organization has that at every time. So as you're aware of those things and then are willing to step in, honestly, Maureen Menard is one who is consistently drawing me outside of my comfort zone. And I have to be willing to go outside of it. It's not easy.
I was actually just going to say, too, just in response to that I have watched Vicki over the last, really, we've known each other now 20 years. I have seen her willing to take those steps and risks. And she's saying, I'm not like the rest of you. I'm not used to this type of thing. And yet she has done it. over and over again. And so there may be coaches that are listening who would be like, oh, I could never do that. And I would just say, yes, you can. And please do. Please step out of the box that you've put yourself in as a coach, because there's so many other different people and spheres and areas that need coaching. And you just have to maybe think a little bit out of the box that has been, you've thought of yourself before, because that's what Vicky's done, and it's been huge.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you,
words.
Lisa. I actually remember just sitting in an airport one time at a table by myself. I don't even know where in the world I was, in some other country, and feeling so outside of my comfort zone. And it truly was as though, the Lord just spoke to my heart at that moment. Vicki, I called you with your experiences and your gifts and your weaknesses and limitations, and I'm going to show my glory through you. So what you bring is enough. Mm-hmm. That brings me to tears even now.
Yeah.
Ooh, ooh, ooh. Thank you both so much for sharing this. I love those last little nuggets that you left with us there, Vicki, that Lisa commented on the impact of. Pay attention to the relationships you have now. God will probably work within what's already started and just kind of keep unfolding. And then secondly, you said pay attention or be alert for opportunities. And then, of course, if he knocks, then we respond, Lord, here I am, send me. And it's probably going to be a little out of our comfort zone. And what reassurance for him to say, yeah, well, whom I call, I will equip. You're the person that I have for this. Let's go. Let's go.
So simple. It sounds so simple, yet it can be so profound and so hard.
Right.
Amen.